Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Govardhana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Govardhana Vallabha Girivardhari Asura Nandana Vardhana Ranjana Asura Nandana Vardhana Ranjana Jamuna Thera Vanachari Yamuna Thera Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Vihari Jaya Govardhana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Govardhana Vallabha Girivardhari Asura Nandana Vardhana Ranjana Asura Nandana Vardhana Ranjana Jamuna Thera Vanachari Yamuna Thera Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Vihari Jaya Govardhana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Govardhana Vallabha Girivardhari Asura Nandana Vardhana Ranjana Asura Nandana Vardhana Ranjana Jamuna Thera Vanachari Yamuna Thera Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Swamam Swadikada Shishima Bhaktivedanta Swami Shabbat Ki Jai, ISKCON Govinda Ki Jai, Control Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Go Permanently. Oh glories to the devotees, oh glories to the devotees, oh glories to the devotees, oh glories to Shigu and Shigaranga. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 12, Creation of the Kamaras and Others, text number 3. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Drisva papi yasham sristim natmanam bhavamanyata bhagavadhyana putena manashyanam tatoshijat Jisva papi yashim tristam natmanam bhavamanyata bhagavadhyana bhutena manasanyam tatoshijat Jisva papi yashim tristim natmanam bhavamanyata bhagavadhyana putena manashanyam tatoshijat. Anyone like to chant? Jisva papi yasim stristim natmanam bhavamanyata bhagavadhyana putena manashanyam tatoshijat. Word for word, drisva, by seeing, papi yasim, sinful, sristim, creation, na, did not, atmanam, unto himself, bahu, much pleasure, amanyata, felt, bhagavat, on the personality of Godhead, jhana, meditation, Putena, purified by that. Manasa, by such a mentality. Anyam, another. Tataha, thereafter. Asrijat, created. Translation per Bhavanagari Sesi Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: seeing such a misleading creation as a sinful task, Brahma did not feel much pleasure in his activity, and therefore he purified himself by meditation on the personality of Godhead. Then he began another term of creation. Please repeat. Seeing such a misleading creation as a sinful task, Brahma did not feel much pleasure in his activity, and therefore he purified himself by meditation on the personality of Godhead. Then he began another term of creation. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Although he created the different influences of nescience, Lord Brahma was not satisfied in performing such a thankless task. But he had to do it because most of the conditioned souls wanted it to be so. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 15:15 that he is present in everyone's heart and is helping everyone to either remember or forget. The question may be raised why the Lord, who is all merciful, helps one to remember and another to forget. Actually, his mercy is not exhibited in partiality towards one and enmity toward another. The living entity, as part and parcel of the Lord, is partially independent because he partially possesses all the qualities of the Lord. Anyone who has some independence may sometimes misuse it due to ignorance. When the living entity prefers to misuse his independence and glide down toward nescience, the all-merciful Lord first of all tries to protect him from the trap. But when the living entity persists in gliding down to hell, the Lord helps him to forget his real position. The Lord helps the falling living entity glide down to the lowest point just to give him the chance to see if he is happy by misusing his independence. Almost all the conditioned souls who are rotting in the material world are misusing their independence, and therefore 5 kinds of nescience are imposed upon them. As an obedient servitor of the Lord, Brahma creates all these as a matter of necessity, but he is not happy in doing so, because a devotee of the Lord naturally does not like to see anyone falling down from his real position. Persons who do not care for the path of realization get full facilities from the Lord for executing their proclivities to the fullest extent, and Brahma helps them in that procedure without fail. So in the previous verse we heard on Friday, we heard that the previous chapter was basically dealing with time and the atom and how it relates to the universe. So this chapter is how Lord Brahma created the universe. As we know, Lord Brahma is not the original creator, but the secondary creator. Krishna, everything ultimately comes from Krishna, but Brahma is empowered to use the material energy to create the universe, not because anybody specifically Krishna or Brahma wanting the material universe, but the individual souls are have that independence, which they're misusing with the idea that they can enjoy separately from Krishna. So therefore the material world is for those conditioned souls who want to pretend that they're gods themselves. In other words, thinking that they are the center of the universe. So therefore, a little area of the cosmic manifestation, namely the material realm, is created for them to fulfill their desires. So Lord Brahma, to fulfill the desire of Krishna and the conditioned souls, he creates this material world. But the first thing he does, as we heard in the previous verse, he creates the different nescient engagements, or the different engagements based on ignorance, namely self-deception, the sense of death, anger after frustration, the sense of false ownership, and the illusory bodily conception. So in other words, if you're a pure devotee engaged in Krishna's pastimes and you're misusing your independence to try to think, I want to enjoy separately, in that mentality of the pure soul won't fit in to the material world. Because the material world is there covered by ignorance. So therefore, the soul has to be covered over with the proper mentality so they fit in to the material world. Basically it's ignorance covered over by nescience, but also other aspects, like the 5 aspects, self-deception, like to deceive oneself, the sense of death or fear of death. Of course, in the spiritual world, there is no death, so therefore there is no fear of death. But in the material world, birth, death, old age, and disease are constant companions. So this sense or fear of death is there. And anger after frustration. When your material desires aren't being fulfilled, you become angry and then you become frustrated. And sense of false ownership, or that everything belongs to oneself, and just the identifying of the body. So all these 5 concepts are there. So when the soul comes in the material world, they're covered over with these different types of ignorance. So as Prabhupada mentions, that Lord Brahma's task in this sense is not a thankless task. Nobody is thanking him for this. It's like a policeman, for instance. A policeman's job, he's empowered by the government to apply the law to the citizens. And if somebody breaks the law, he has to, arrest them and put them into jail. So nobody is thanking the policeman for that. Thank you so much for arresting me and putting me in jail. Everybody's abusing the policeman in different ways if they get caught, but nobody's thanking. Also, like the jail keeper, the prisoners aren't thanking the jail keeper, but that's his job. The jail warden is to keep the prisoners within the jail. And even something like the taxman, nobody thanks the taxman for taking my hard-earned money. But the taxman's job on behalf of the government is to collect the taxes to maintain the country. So it's the same principle. Lord Brahma's, he has a thankless task of keeping the living entities under that covering of ignorance. So in one class, Srila Prabhupada in Madhya Lila 20.293, he says that Maya's task is a very thankless task because she's in charge of these conditioned souls, and her business is to give all the conditioned souls always miseries. So in the same point, Maya's task is a thankless task. And in a sense, she's embarrassed to be in front of Krishna because that's her, Maya means the illusory energy. So again, it's the same principle that nobody's thanking her for falling into ignorance, but nevertheless, that's her service on behalf of Krishna. And we also have the devotees in Bhagavatam 6.5.39, that the devotees are actually the friends of every living entity, Suradam Sarvabhutanam. And but for the conditioned souls, they are sort of misunderstood, sometimes misunderstood as their enemies. That here is this person trying to give me a book of transcendental knowledge. They're trying to pull me out of ignorance. Therefore, they're trying to tell me that I'm not the centre of the universe. So therefore, they're my enemy because they're getting in the way of my sense gratification. So Prabhupada continues that preaching can be a difficult, thankless task, but a preacher must follow the orders of the Supreme Lord and be unafraid of materialistic person. So again, a devotee's task is sometimes thankless. They get abused and criticised and labelled in so many, parasites of the society or whatever. Go and get a job, all sorts of things we hear. But the devotee is acting on behalf of the Supreme Lord to try to pull these conditioned souls out of ignorance. So despite the difficulties, they push on with their service. So one time an interviewer reporter asked Prabhupada, he said, why does God allow us to suffer? If you were saying that Krishna, that God is an all-loving person, why does he allow us to suffer? So it's an age-old question. That if God really loves us, why does he allow us to suffer? So Prabhupada, he responded that because some people choose to live in darkness. Everybody has free will, and Krishna, he doesn't interfere with our free will. That's his mercy upon us. Because if we have free will, that means we can voluntarily choose to love Krishna. But at the same time, if we misuse that free will, we can voluntarily choose to live in ignorance. But if that free will was taken away, then it's, we don't have a choice. That's not really love. Love is when you voluntarily focus that emotion on a particular person. So, you can't force someone to love a person. That has to come voluntary from the heart. But for the conditioned soul, that same free will can be misused to fall into ignorance. So Prabhupada continued the reporter that Krishna allows the creation to facilitate the desire of the jiva, the living entity, to imitate being God or the centre of the universe. He also creates that ignorance so the jiva forgets Krishna. So once again, it's like if you're caught by the police and you're breaking the law, caught by the police, put in jail, you can ask, whose fault is it? Is it the policeman's fault? Is it the government's fault? Is it somebody else's fault? Or is it our own fault? Everybody likes to blame somebody else. And, if something good happens, a lot of people, they won't thank God. Oh, thank you, you're so kind that you've allowed me this, won the lottery or whatever. Something good happened to them. But when something bad happens, immediately they like to point the fight, blame God for it. So there's a bit of hypocrisy there. But in the same way, but in opposite, like in the material world, we get covered over by the ignorance, by the material energy. But so that's Mahamaya. But the role of Yogamaya in the same way covers over the residents of Vrindavan, the pure eternal devotees of Krishna. And that's Yogamaya covers them over, so they don't know Krishna's God. So it's the same principle, but it's on a spiritual realm, and the result is completely the opposite. That because the residents of Vrindavan, they see Krishna as their son or see Krishna as their lover. If they were to think that this little boy is God, that whole relationship can't manifest properly. That I think, it sort of just that rasa won't happen. So therefore we know that story where that when Krishna's friends were saying that Krishna was eating dirt, and Mother Jasoda said, open up your your mouth and see. And Krishna says, I'm not eating dirt. They're just blaming me needlessly. Anyway, open up. And when he opened up, Yashoda saw the vision of the whole universe. And for a moment, he's thinking, this can't be my boy. This must be the Supreme Person or Narayan or something. But immediately, Krishna covered her over again because he enjoyed that rasa, that parental rasa of his mother looking after him as a helpless boy. But if that idea that my son is God, that rasa can't develop. You can't really taste that parental rasa. So it's the same principle, being covered over and not realising Krishna's God, but there's two opposites there. One is from the material sense, that you thinking you're the centre, and from the spiritual is understanding Krishna is just that young boy who needs to be looked after. So sometimes there's the claim from the atheists that they say that the creation is flawed because God allows suffering to occur. But the living entity causes that suffering by inflicting it upon themselves. Basically, if one transcends the law of the land, you can't use the excuse to the policeman that I didn't know the law. I mean, for instance, if you're driving on the wrong side of the road or not stopping at the lights, whatever, if you're on the road, it is your duty to know what the law is. So similarly in this human form of life, it is our duty to understand what is our role in this material world. What proper morals and ethics and etc. that we should be following to be civilized human beings. But if we transgress these principles, then there's going to be some karmic reaction. That's just the way the universe is made up. So therefore, if one is suffering, they've put it upon themselves, like Prabhupada mentioned earlier, that some people choose to live in darkness, or in other words, choose not to follow the universal principles that is expected of one in the human form of life. So Prabhupada explains that if things were very pleasant here, everything was very nice, nothing ever happened that went wrong, there'd be no impetus to try to get out of this material world. Like somebody who's very wealthy, living in the lap of luxury, they're thinking, what do I need God for? I have everything I need here. The same in the heavenly planets, everything is so nice, there's no impetus to want to get out of this material situation. So therefore, we have a little bit of happiness, but also suffering as well. So it's just enough to give us an impetus for an intelligent person to try to put themselves on the path closer to Krishna, take themselves back to home, back to Godhead, so that so they're not just constantly birth after birth, wallowing in this material world. So in the purport that we read today, Prabhupada mentions that when the living entity prefers to misuse his independence and glide down towards nescience, the all-merciful Lord first of all tries to protect them from the trap. But when the living entity persists in gliding down to hell, the Lord helps him to forget his real position. So, recent class I heard Kavichandra Maharaj, he said he was in a class with Prabhupada where Prabhupada said, Krishna has given us 3 chances when we're in the spiritual world. 3 chances before we fall into the world. If we make a mistake or we have the wrong mentality, we get 3 chances. So it's not that, one little mistake and we're gone. It's I was working years ago with one Muslim man, quite a nice man, but when you get onto religion, on like the Islamic tradition, he's telling me that Allah is very merciful. but if you don't worship him, you go to hell. And I said, so how long do you go to hell? He says, forever. And I said, well, that doesn't sound very merciful. Yeah, he's very merciful. But if you don't worship him, you go to hell forever. So, it's not a very attractive idea that I should worship this Allah, and if I make one mistake. Even in this world, somebody commits the most horrible crime, they might get life imprisonment. But a life sentence is basically usually 25 years, 25, 30, and less with good behaviour. So, but if you just make one philosophical mistake, and you worship, the wrong God or whatever, you go to hell forever. It's a bit over the top, this idea. So, Prabhupada is saying that from his realisation, understanding, we get 3 chances. And of course, in this material world, we get so many chances. Every birth, every life is a chance to take up spiritual life. So, this idea, understanding that Krishna is far more merciful, it's a little bit more attractive than other traditions. And even when we do come to the material world, it's not that we're abandoned. Krishna himself comes with us within the heart, a super soul. So he doesn't say you're on your own, good luck. He comes with us within the heart. He also sends the spiritual master, he sends scripture, he sends the saintly persons. And so those saintly persons, they are, traversing the world, trying to give the conditioned souls, knowledge of their true spiritual identity. So really, somebody can't claim, in all seriousness, that or blame God that we're suffering. It's because of God that we're suffering. We bring it on themselves, and even if we do come in the material world, in so many ways, He tries to help us to come back as well. But it's all about allowing us to fulfill our individual desires under the principle of our free will. We have free will to love Krishna, but we also have free will to fall into ignorance, and Krishna doesn't interfere with that. But, as we said, at the same time, if we do fall into the material world, he helps us in so many different ways. And so the verse, the Bhagavad Gita verse that Prabhupada quoted in the purport 15:15, that Krishna says to Arjuna that I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me comes remembrance, knowledge and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas I am to be known, I am the compiler of Vedanta and the knower of the Vedas. And also part of the Chaita Sloki, the 4 seed verses of Bhagavad Gita 10:11, he says that for those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give them the understanding by which they can come to me. So he's dwelling in the heart and giving us all encouragement and information and knowledge if we choose to hear him. But once again, that comes to our free will. With our free will, we can choose to listen to Super Soul, that subtle voice. Subtle voice manifests as our conscience. And, we've all got the experience. We've done something, we know it's wrong and we feel bad. That's Super Soul giving us, try to bring us back onto the right path. So we can choose to listen to him or choose to ignore him. The choice is ours. And just in that purport of that verse, Prabhupada says that the living entity forgets everything of his past life, but he has to act according to the direction of the Supreme Lord. He begins his work according to his past deeds. So whatever we've been doing in our previous life, Krishna as Super Soul within our heart, he reminds us, and we pick up our activities from our previous life. So required knowledge is applied to him, and remembrance is given to him, and he forgets also about his past life. So everything, and we always have that experience that we're trying to think of somebody's name, or we're trying to think of something, and you just can't get it. And then you just stop trying, and a couple of minutes later it just pops into your head. We've all had that experience. So that's super soul, just fulfilling our desires in so many different ways. In the 11th canto of Bhagavad Gita, at the Uddhava Gita 11.28.33, Krishna says to Uddhava, material nescience is wrongly accepted by the conditioned soul to be identical with the self. But through the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, the same nescience fades away at the time of liberation. The eternal self, on the other hand, is never abandoned. So we come into the material world covered with ignorance, but that ignorance is not who we are. We may identify with that ignorance or the influence of that, identifying with the material, with our body, identifying with our extended family, with our nation, etc., etc. But that's not actually who we are. It's a temporary covering. But as we come closer and closer, if we're on the path of spiritual life, coming closer to Krishna, that ignorance slowly fades away. And so that's Krishna's, he's reciprocating. If we want to come closer to him, he's helping us. But if we choose to be in ignorance, he's helping us also. So he's really just fulfilling our desire. So again, we can't blame him that it's because of God that we're suffering. He's just fulfilling our desires in whatever way, whatever, direction we choose to go in. And even if we're following that direction, one degree or another, but then we veer off the path. It's not that we're abandoned. Also, that Krishna's thinking, I tried to help them, but they're not following. Therefore, I just give them up. Something like use the example of the GPS, that you put your destination in, and you can just follow the directions. You don't even have to look at the map. You just follow the verbal directions as you're driving, and you'll get there. But if you choose to, or you make a mistake and you go off the path, the GPS doesn't just shut down. This guy's useless, forget him. I gave him the path and doesn't want to follow, it just switches off. No, it just reroutes, that's all. It just gives us another route. It might take a bit longer, but we'll still get to the destination. So in that way, Krishna... There's a funny story about GPS. I was with my mother. She's about 90 now. And I met her in Adelaide at the airport, and she got the bus there, and I had a hire car, and we were driving back. I don't know Adelaide that well, but I had my GPS. And so she was listening to the voice, turn here, turn there. And after a while, she said, how does that lady know where we are? I thought that was quite funny. So, and then we turned into the driveway and said, you have arrived at your destination. My mother said, yeah, she's right, we are here. So yeah, that was quite funny. But but if I went off the track, the GPS would just reroute and just give, we'd end up at the home sooner or later, So Krishna's like that. We may go off the path for many lives even, but Krishna's still with us within the heart. And, eventually, if we choose to listen, we'll eventually get to the destination. So, Srimad Bhagavatam 11:20-17, we hear that the human form of life is the most valuable boat, and the spiritual master is the captain of that boat, to guide the boat in plying across the ocean of nescience. The instruction of Krishna is the favourable breezes. One must use all these facilities to cross over the ocean of nescience or ignorance. One must serve the spiritual master very sincerely, so that by his mercy one will be able to get the mercy of the Supreme Lord. So again, Krishna is providing everything we need if we choose to take advantage of it, but it has to be up to our free will. So the previous verse we heard that Lord Brahma, he created those 5 different types of ignorance just to set the scene for the living entity to come into the material covered by that ignorance. But it was a thankless task. Brahma wasn't really happy with this, so therefore he chose to establish the next stage of creation. And so we'll hear in tomorrow's verse that he created Sankhya, or the analytical study of material conditions, of yoga, the process, the liberation from material bondage, Vairagya, detachment from material enjoyment, and Tapasya, performing various kinds of voluntary austerities to purify the heart. And along with that, those four aspects, he also, from his own mind, he produced the four Manasaputras, or the four mind-born sons, and they were the four Kumaras. And so they were created to teach these four types of knowledge. So the four Kumara, Sanak, Sanandan, Sanat, and Sanat Kumara, they were entrusted with these four principles. And of course we know the four Vaishnava Sampradayas, or disciplic successions. One of them is the Kumara Sampradaya, the Acharya being Nimbakacharya. So of the four different Vaishnava Sampradayas, the four Kumaras were put in charge of one, teaching these different principles. And of course it's not just the devotees or the Vaishnavas or the Hare Krishnas that are presenting this idea that, if you take up spiritual life, your life will be benefited and the whole world will be at benefit in so many different ways. I mean, even academic scholars are presenting the same thing if we choose to look for that. So I just found some academic references that as researched by, or the reference Appleby and Oschalga 2013, that was their research paper. So they wrote about theistic interventions, and they concluded that religion positively influenced human relationships in almost 3,000 scientific studies conducted in the 19th, 20th and 21st centuries, resulting in, so this is the result of the research, just briefly presented, that greater overall well-being, optimism and life purpose, increased self-esteem, better adaptation to bereavement, healthier social support, lower rates of depression, fewer suicides, less anxiety, substance abuse and crime, and stronger marital happiness and stability. So that was on page 370 of that particular report. So it's not just the devotees, just some crazy devotees, chanting some mantras saying that Krishna is, you bring Krishna into your life will be better. I mean, you do hear a lot of people about religion is useless, it just causes wars, there's no such thing as God. If there is, why does he cause so much suffering? I mean, a lot of these are just emotional outbursts based on no really platform or evidence. But it's not just the practicing devotees or theists. A lot of the academics, if they actually do the research, they come up with these sort of conclusions that if you include, bona fide spiritual practices within your life is definitely improves in so many different factors. Okay, we'll end there. Thank you very much. Is there any questions or comments at all? Which one was first? Yeah, this one. Hare Krishna.
This is also on. This is also on.
Yeah, Haladini, I saw your hand first. You can.
I think Vaishnavi wanted to.
Anyway, as you like.
Thank you for the class. Yeah. You were mentioning that the Super Soul guides us and he's that conscience. Can you talk a bit more about someone may do something and they say, oh, that was God instructing me, that was the the super soul, but then they may do something like murder someone and say, "Oh, God told me to do that."
Yeah, well, that's a little bit different. That's when you come into the realm of, like mental illness, that you're hearing voices, Obviously, God's not going to tell you to do something that's improper, So you're possessed by, booters or some sort of mental illness, you may be hearing these voices, but that's completely different, understanding. Super soul, generally people talk about intuition. So intuition is super soul. It's the same understanding that, I intuitively decided to do this or thought this was right or wrong, or this is super soul appearing. But, it's just a different word, basically, but we're still talking about Krishna within the heart. But if somebody says, God told me to kill this person or whatever, obviously, the Supreme Person isn't going to be telling us to do that, Need to do... Yeah. So everything that we know or that we, evidence that we take has to be, as you say, spiritual master, scripture, and the saintly persons. So anything outside that, that may risk just, speculative sort of understanding. Hallelujah.
Okay, Hare Krishna. Thank you for a very nice class, Prabhu. Yeah, I was thinking about, at the start of your class, you were speaking about, how Lord Brahma, and during the creative processes, and, he establishes certain factors within the material universe, and you also mentioned Mahamaya, the role of Mahamaya. So I just want to add to that, Prabhupada says that, of Lord Shiva and, Maya Devi, that they are pure devotees of Krishna. And in some purports, Srila Prabhupada says that Lord Brahma is also a pure devotee. In another section, he negates that, but he says it in some sections. So, I just want to add that when these, when Maya Devi, when external Mahamaya, is testing, and making things difficult for the living entity, for the devotee, it's not that she desires for the spiritual living entity to be entangled in material life. As you're rightly saying, it's her task to do that. But I've read that, her and, Lord Shiva, and just like the other pure devotees, it is their utmost desire that a living being comes out of the material energy and actually finds their way to the Supreme Lord. So I think that's an important thing to remember, because sometimes when we're discussing the demigods, at least these leading demigods who are recognized as pure devotees, their actual desire is not, that the living entity will keep being, will keep stumbling over all these different challenges.
No, it's a good point. I hope I wasn't presenting like that.
No. Just adding something.
That they want them to suffer. As you say, they've been tested, basically. And, there's the thankless task that due to their past activities, they're destined to suffer. So it's the role of these personalities to inflict it upon them. But as you say, it's not that they're out of some sort of envy or spite that, that they're happy to inflict that suffering. Ultimately, they want to bring them out. Yes, so that's a good point.
And just one last thing. I've also heard that Mahamaya, she only ever works with the desires, the material desires that are within our own hearts.
Yeah.
Whatever's already there.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Thank you. Anything else at all? Okay, thank you very much. Prabhupada ki jai.